Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. In case you live under a rock, the HBO Harry Potter series just dropped its first trailer, and honestly, it gave us a lot. I was expecting a 25-second long teaser trailer with a few frames, but we got a lot more than that. And after watching it a few times, I've got a lot of thoughts, because this show looks very different from what I expected, in a good way. Right off the bat, the biggest thing that stood out to me is the tone. This version of Harry Potter looks much darker, much more grounded, and honestly a bit more mature than the original Philosopher's Stone film. And that's interesting because while the film seems to gradually get darker over time, this one feels like it's starting darker from the very beginning. And I do wonder if that means the following films will follow suit, with Deathly Hallows potentially being the darkest. Even the music and atmosphere reflect that. And there's this constant tension underneath everything. It almost feels right away like it's catered to an older audience, and I guess this makes sense because Harry Potter is a lot more established now than when the original film came out. The trailer opens at the Dursleys, which is exactly what you'd expect, but it already feels a bit harsher than the films. They really did a good job, at least with the trailer, of making it look like an awful, awful place that anyone would be glad to escape. And Harry himself looks great. Physically, he feels very close to how Harry is described in the books. Slight, dark-haired, pale, and generally a bit smaller and more vulnerable looking than the people around him. He has the right mix of scrappiness and innocence, which is important for Harry early on. He's not supposed to feel overly polished or overly heroic at this stage. He's just a kid who's been neglected, pushed around, and has no idea how significant he really is just yet. He also has that slightly uncanny quality, where he feels familiar enough to immediately register as Harry, but not in a way that feels like he's just copying Daniel Radcliffe, which is probably the sweet spot you want. The one thing I did notice though is that the lightning bolt scar still doesn't appear to be properly book accurate. In the books, Harry's scar is described as being on his forehead, basically centered, but here, just like in the original films, it seems to sit more off to the side. That's obviously not a huge issue in the grand scheme of things, but it is one of those details that fans always notice. From there, the trailer cuts to Harry at school, and this was actually one of the more interesting parts for me, because we've never really seen this before. We've heard about it, Dudley, his friends and all that, but we've never actually seen Harry dealing with it day to day. In fact, we never really got to see much of Harry's life before he heads to Hogwarts in the original films. And here you get that. He's being chased around, bullied, and even though they don't actually show it, this is likely a setup for one of the moments in which Harry finds himself on the roof, just like in the books. He'd gotten into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of the school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's, there he was sitting on the chimney. But all he tried to do was jump behind the big trash cans outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him mid-jump. The trailer then cuts back to Harry at home with Petunia, where we see her cutting his hair, something that was always mentioned but never shown. And in the books, of course, Harry wakes up the next morning and it's grown back completely, like nothing ever happened. This is a pretty dark scene. The colours are dull, everything feels kind of lifeless, and Petunia is just laying into him. She also doesn't seem just annoyed like she does in the films, but instead properly hostile. She's looking him in the eyes while giving him a dreadful haircut and telling him that there's nothing special about him. Oh yeah, and she points scissors at him a couple of inches away from his face. This is a level of hostility we didn't really get in the films. Film Petunia was mean, but it was more petty. This feels a lot more vindictive. They really do a good job of making it feel like Harry's home life is completely miserable. You'll also probably notice that Petunia's appearance is completely different than the original films. And that's for one simple reason. The original films didn't physically portray her character well at all. The following book passage explains what she was meant to look like. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbours. In this regard, the new Petunia does seem more fitting, particularly the blonde hair, which is a small but important detail that was completely overlooked in the original films. After the haircutting scene, we see Harry finally get his Hogwarts letter, and from there, we fast forward to him riding a muggle train with Hagrid, presumably to King's Cross. During this interaction, Hagrid shares a few words about Harry's parents, telling him that they were some of the bravest people he had ever met. I will say that Nick Frost seems like he has the right demeanour to play Hagrid. There's a warmth to him that comes across immediately, which is obviously essential for the character. But I will say, the voice took me out of it a little bit. He's shooting for the West Country accent, and there are definitely hints of it there, but it's just not quite the same as what we're used to. Robbie Coltrane's Hagrid had that really deep, almost booming, gravelly voice, something that instantly gave the character a kind of presence and weight. Given that Hagrid is a half-giant, this does somehow feel important. Frost's version feels just a bit lighter by comparison. Although it isn't necessarily bad, it might take some getting used to. And I think that's going to be the case with a lot of these characters. From there, we see Harry pushing his trolley at King's Cross, shortly before boarding the train and witnessing Ron Weasley, played by Alistair Stout, giving his mum Molly, played by Catherine Parkinson, a hug. I will say that I'm a huge Catherine Parkinson fan, and I think she's going to absolutely crush it as Molly Weasley. Great job to the casting department there. Anyway, the hug is a quick shot, but it does a good job of introducing that family dynamic right away. Ron looks exactly how you'd expect. There's even that small detail of him having dirt on his nose later on, which is a nice touch, because it lines up with how he's described in the books. Overall, this whole King's Cross sequence feels like a proper transition point, Harry leaving the Muggle world behind for good and finally stepping into something new. And from here, the trailer really starts to open up into the Hogwarts experience. Next up, we see Harry on board the Hogwarts Express, the train arriving at Hogwarts, and Hagrid leading first years through the forest, lanterns and all, up to Hogwarts. The lead up to Hogwarts is always one of my favourite parts of the original films, as there's so much magic and suspense in the air, and what follows this scene is even better, our first glimpse at Hogwarts. I will say that the first thing I felt was that Hogwarts felt uncanny. Not in a bad way, but in that strange middle ground where so much of it looks familiar, almost like what we've already seen, but just slightly different. The layout, the tone, colour coding, and even certain compositions all feels like it's echoing the original films, but at the same time, it does feel like its own thing. And what really stood out to me was the level of detail in individual shots. There's a moment of Harry sitting in the classroom, and it just feels like there's way more attention being placed on it. The lighting, the framing, the scale of the room itself, it all feels more deliberate, more cinematic. And overall, at least so far, Hogwarts doesn't just feel bigger, it feels more grand, more immersive, more fully realised than what we got in the original films. During these first few glimpses of Hogwarts, we also get a look at the new McGonagall, played by Janet McTeer, as well as our first shot of the Sorting Hat. And I've got to say, McGonagall looks really solid. She has that same kind of stern presence you'd expect from the character, but there's also something slightly different about her, maybe a bit more intensity right off the bat. It doesn't feel like a copy of the original portrayal, which I was expecting. It is early to say, but it actually feels like her own version of McGonagall, which I think is important. And then there's the Sorting Hat, which still looks like, well, a hat. Notably, the iconic Leslie Phillips who voiced the Sorting Hat passed away a few years ago, so I do wonder what they'll do there. He had such a distinctive, almost theatrical voice that instantly gave the Sorting Hat personality. Following this, we get quick cuts of the trio, including the new Hermione, Arabella Stanton, and Ron Weasley, Alistair Stout. And then a quick cut to Harry interacting with none other than Garrick Ollivander, played by Anton Lesser at Ollivanders. Right away, he looks very different from the late John Hurt, but at the same time, he still feels familiar. In the books, there's always been something a bit off about Ollivander. Not evil, but slightly unsettling. Like he knows far more than he lets on. And I actually think Anton Lesser's physical portrayal taps into that a bit more. There's something in the way he carries himself, in his expression, that leans more into that quiet, almost eerie awareness. Voice is spot on as well. I think we can expect great things from you. After this, we see Harry in the classroom, like I mentioned earlier. The set design here is truly spectacular, and it's clear they put a lot of effort into this scene. From there, the trailer kind of speeds up, and we get a bunch of quick shots from across Harry's first year. We see Draco Malfoy, played by Lox Pratt, alongside his usual group, likely Crabbe, Goyle, and Pansy Parkinson, getting that early sense of rivalry. There's a shot of Harry opening the Nimbus 2000, which is a nice little moment because it hints at his progression into Quidditch. We then get a glimpse of a Quidditch match, looks like Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff, the same one Snape referees in the books. Then we jump into Herbology class, where you can spot Hermione alongside Neville, played by Rory Wilmot. There's also a great shot of Harry and Ron on the Hogwarts Express surrounded by a bunch of sweets, which is one of those small iconic moments that really captures the magic of that first year. And then a few more quick flashes. Hagrid making snow angels, the moving spiral staircase inside Hogwarts, a bunch of Harry's day-to-day life, then we get our first real glimpse of Severus Snape. And yeah, he looks very different. Obviously this version of Snape is black with dreadlocks, which obviously isn't book accurate. But at the same time, it's kind of too late now, and the show still looks strong overall. I'm absolutely still going to watch, and I'm eager to see what his performance will be like. From there, we get our first glimpse of the new Dumbledore, played by John Lithgow. Visually, I think he looks solid. He actually reminds me a bit of the original Dumbledore, Richard Harris, who was in the first two films. He's got that calm, composed presence you'd expect, but maybe with a slightly different energy than what we've seen before. If anything, he does come across a bit older, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does stand out. That said, we don't see much of him here, so it's hard to fully judge. As long as we don't have any "Harry, did you put your name into the goblet of fire" incidents and Lithgow nails the accent, I think he'll do just fine. The closing moments of the trailer show Harry on board the Hogwarts Express talking with Ron and Hermione, and it's clearly meant to establish that core friendship right away. And I actually really like that they chose to end on this, because after all the darker tones and the tension at the Dursleys, this brings it back to something more grounded. It reminds you what the story is really about, not just magic, but friendship. Following this, there is one more little tidbit worth pointing out, and that's the release date. As it turns out, the first season will premiere December 2026. That's right, this year, and not the 2027 window we were expecting. This is exciting news, and it also follows the trend of the original films being released during wintertime. If you think back to the original films, there's always been something very seasonal about Harry Potter. A lot of them released in the winter, and there's just something about that time of year, the atmosphere, the holidays, that fits perfectly with the tone of the series. It's cozy, it's nostalgic, but also a bit magical. And this feels like HBO leaning into that same idea. Anyway, that about sums up the trailer, but I do have a few more things I'd like to add. First of all, the trailer for this show is much better than I had anticipated. I've maintained cautious optimism since the show was first announced, and I'm obviously a diehard fan of the original films, so I did feel a bit protective. However, this truly does feel like a reinterpretation aimed at a whole new generation of fans that weren't fortunate enough to experience what I experienced growing up. If they get this right, there are going to be people experiencing Hogwarts and the trio and this entire world for the very first time, in a way that's more detailed, more faithful, and maybe even a bit more mature from the start. And for longtime fans, I think the best way to look at this is simple. The original films aren't going anywhere. They'll always be there. This is just another way to experience the story. And based on this trailer, it looks like it might be a pretty good one. And that's it for today's video. For more updates on the show, as well as a whole bunch of other Harry Potter lore, theories, etc., make sure to subscribe to the channel and to like the video. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.